Hello everyone, Surya from Design Plus Code and welcome to the iOS Design Handbook. In this handbook, we'll be going over designing for iOS and understanding the design language of the Apple platform by following the human interface guidelines that will help us better understand about colors, typography, and layout, as these are the building blocks of design. And knowing this can be really useful. Now, if you see how much design has evolved from the past few years, and you can already sense that colors, typography, and layout play a major role in today's design scene. If you take a look at the original iOS, it takes a lot of inspiration from the real world, from textures to shadows, to help users better understand how the product works by using these metaphors. But it's not the same case anymore, as everyone is comfortable and can understand better how things work digitally. And as a result, the iOS 7 refresh happened, which embraced flat colors, rich typography, and high resolution content. And now with iOS 14, the texts are bolder, they have much better hierarchy than what we had before. They also use rounded corners and drop shadow to make the UI more tactile and approachable. And now in the recent years, devices are getting bigger and bigger, so it is very hard for users to interact with their screens just with a thumb. And as a result, the bottom card UI was born that addresses this problem by moving all the interactive elements to the bottom of the screen, making it easier for users to interact with the apps as everything is within the reach of a thumb. Another important thing with iOS 14 is to make your content clear and readable, and this can be only done through typography. So it is very essential for us to have the right type sizes and styles. Another thing with iOS 14 is the use of cards and models, as this helps people focus on self-contained tasks or act on critical information without any distraction. Another important aspect of iOS are the animations, and this helps to create delightfulness in the minds of users. But it is very important to keep this subtle and minimal and not to go overboard with this, as oftentimes this can create frustration. So always aim to have subtle animation that doesn't last longer. You should be also aware that animations are not mainly used to create delightfulness, rather to indicate users about the change of context. Finally, be realistic when the animations are demonstrated. A model that slides from the bottom should be dismissed back to the bottom of the screen. That way, users can appreciate the physicality of the elements even if they are digital. Now with all this put together, we can agree that iOS is all about clarity, difference, and depth. Now, before getting into the tutorials, I would like you to hop on to Human Interface Guidelines and read about the design guidelines that Apple has written, which will help you immensely to understand the iOS design language and the whole Apple platform and how their approach to design is. And what's so special about these guidelines is, it won't restrict you but rather help you get out of the constraints. I'd also like you to download the Apple Design Resources, which has the iOS UI kit that provides all the native UI elements, system colors, and system font styles, which will help you move faster rather than starting from scratch every single time. Unfortunately, the UI kit is not available for Figma, but what you can do is on Figma, head over to the Community tab and search for iOS 14 UI kit and download this file by Joey Banks, which is totally free and you can use this as a library. I also want you to download the SF fonts, which is the font that Apple uses on all its platforms. Of course, you can use your own fonts, but this is a good place to start with, as Apple has most of the type styles ready for you, so you don't have to stress about typography. One last thing I want you to download is the SF symbols, which is a font icon that seamlessly integrates with the SF fonts, and all you have to do to use this is copy and paste it just like you do with the text. And that's all you need to get started with. And I hope this will be useful to you and you'll be enjoying the handbook. See you in the next video. Bye! Hello everyone, Surya from Design Plus Code. In this video, we'll take a look at how to work with colors in iOS. Before starting, I would like you to read about colors in Human Interface Guidelines by Apple. It has many great pointers working with colors, especially in the iOS, so this is something worth checking out. I'd also suggest you to read about the color system by Material Design. This is more focused for Android devices, and this comes with a color tool that will help you create color palettes for your app. You could pick colors from this existing selection or choose your own colors using the color wheel, and this will create the palette for you. You can also see examples on how to use and where to use the colors, which is really useful. Anyway, let's get into designing. So I'm going to switch to Figma. As you can see here, I have a simple UI that makes use of black and white colors mostly, which is good. But if you want to make your app more interesting, I would suggest you to add more colors, which will bring more personality to the app. Before getting started, I would like to mention that Apple has some default colors that you can choose from, and you don't have to worry about how the color translates between light and dark mode because Apple will do that for you. You also have this other set of colors which can be really useful to bring hierarchy in text content. So how do you get these colors? Let's get back to Figma and head over to the Community tab and search for iOS and iPadOS UI kit for Figma, and duplicate this file which is created by Joey Banks. And head over to the file, switch to the Assets tab and open the Assets catalog. Here you can publish the library. Once done, let's get back to our design file, switch to the Assets tab and open the Assets catalog. And here you can enable the UI kit. Once you have enabled this, you can simply select an element and you can go to the layer fill options and click on the style icon. And here you can see all the colors from the iOS UI kit. Now the important part is how to use these colors. For that, we need to ask ourselves two questions. What are the interactive elements and what are the content that requires the most attention from the user? Let's start with the first one, interactive elements. Interactive elements are buttons and links, and these are the elements that will make use of the primary colors the most. Now that I have figured out my interactive elements, I'm going to select the layer, head over to selection colors and hit the style icon. And from here, I'm going to pick a primary color for my app. Let's choose the system indigo. Great. Now we need to decide which is more important in these two buttons to create hierarchy so that they both won't fight for attention from the user. In this case, the back button is less important compared to the next. So I'm going to select the element, head over to selection colors and unlink the system indigo and open the color picker. Here, I would like you to switch to HSB instead of hex as it gives you more control. Now, what are these values? The first value is the hue, the second is the saturation, and third is the brightness. Let's set the saturation to 5 and the brightness to 90. Once you have this, let's change the text color to black so that we have more contrast. Awesome. As you can sense, the design feels a little too heavy at the moment. This is because we're using black for all the text and this doesn't create enough hierarchy. To fix this, let's find the important content first. In this case, the Swift UI test and the question text remains the most important, so we won't be touching that. The less important are the caption text and the subtitle. Select both of the elements and change the fill opacity from 100 to 70%. You can either do this or head over to the color styles and go all the way down and choose label color light and secondary. As you can see now, there's more contrast and hierarchy between these texts. Now, let's set a nice off-white background color. For this, what I like to do is match it with my primary color. I've selected the whole frame and press I on your keyboard to access the color picker. And choose the primary color. Now, head over to the fill and open the color picker. And set the saturation value to anywhere between 3 to 5 and the brightness all the way to 100. And now it feels more consistent. And the one last thing I would like to show you is how to give feedback using colors. You can see in this UI, I need to show the user that they have picked the right choice. And this can be easily done through colors. So I'll be selecting this part of the text and use green to show that it is the right choice. Let's open the color picker and select green in the color spectrum. I'm going to slightly modify this using the HSB values. Let's set the hue to 170, the saturation to 80, and the brightness to around 70. Great. Now let's do the same for the check icon. So I'm going to copy this hex code right here and select my icon and change the gray color to green. Lastly, I want to bring some hierarchy between these three options. So I'm going to do that by selecting both of these texts and set the fill opacity to 70%. And as you can see, the UI looks much better than before. And that's the end of the video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. See you in the next one. Bye. Hello and welcome, Surya from Design Plus Code. In this video, we'll be focusing on typography and dynamic types in iOS. Before getting into design, I would like you to quickly hop on to Human Interface Guidelines and read about typography, which will help you a lot as a designer since typography is the most important part of your design. Now let's quickly scroll down to the dynamic type section where you can find all the default text sizes that Apple suggests you to use. The advantage of this is Apple will automatically match your app's text styles to the options set in the accessibility settings. Let's say the user has set to small, your app's default large title will have font size of 32 instead of 34. And that's why I highly suggest sticking to this. And you could also check the letter spacing values that you'd want to use. Let's say if your font size is set to 20 pixels, then you'd want to have the letter spacing set to minus 0.45. Keep in mind that these guides are only here to help you. Once you have a better understanding, you can go on your own. I'd also want you to install the SF font, which is the font that Apple suggests you to use for its platform. Now let's get into designing. So I'm going to switch to Figma. Let's start by adding our title. So I'm going to press T on my keyboard and add a text. I'll write in design for iPad. Once you have the text, let's align it to the center of the frame. Set the font family to SF Pro Display. Set the font weight to bold. And then the font size to 34. Once you have this, let's move it a little bit to the top. Let's have a margin of 40 from the illustration. Let's set the font color to white so that we have more contrast between the font and the background. It's also important to note that SF Pro Display is used for font sizes above 20 and SF Pro Text is used for font sizes below 20. This is because, as you can see here, SF Pro Text has more letter spacing than SF Pro Display. Because for small text, you'd want to have the letter spacing more so that it is more readable, which is not the case for large titles. Since it's already readable, we'd want to have a tight letter spacing, and that's why Apple suggests you to use SF Pro Display. So I'm going to switch back to that. Now that we have our title, let's add the subtitle. So I'm going to press Command D to duplicate this text. I'm going to move this a little bit down right here. Let's set the font size to 17 and the font weight to regular. Also change the font to SF Pro Text since the font size is below 20. There's also one last thing that we need to do before moving on, which is the letter spacing. For that, I'll be referring to the Human Interface Guidelines. As you know, the body text is set to 17, which means we should have our letter spacing to minus 0.43. So I'm going to go back to my Figma file and set this to minus 0.43. Awesome. Now I'm going to add my subtitle text, set the bounding box width to 280 and align it to the center of the frame. I'm going to also set the padding top to 10, which is from the title. Great, let's move on and add our subtitle. So I'm going to duplicate this by pressing Command D, move it 10 pixels down. I'm going to quickly change the text. Now let's set the font size to 13 and the font weight to semi-bold. And let's head over to type details by pressing on this icon here. Let's set the letter casing to uppercase and set the font fill opacity to 70% to have better text hierarchy and contrast between the texts. Great. Now the one last thing that we need to do is add our body text. So I'm going to quickly paste my text here and move it down right here. Let's set our font to SF Pro Display since our font size will be 20 pixels. Also change the font weight to medium. Great, now let's add a paragraph, but before I'm going to increase the frame height so that we have more room. Awesome. Now I'm going to option drag the body text holding shift to duplicate it and paste in my paragraph text. Once I have this, I'm going to change the font to SF Pro Text since we'll have our font size below 20. So I'm going to set this to 17 pixels and change the font weight to regular. As you can see here, the text looks a little bit tight, so I'm going to increase the line height to 140%. Now it is better and more readable. It is suggested to have a line height anywhere between 140 to 170, and also limit your characters per line to 90 so that users can have a pause every now and then instead of reading on and on. One last thing I would like to mention is to always have your text alignment set to left, unless you're dealing with short lines of text like the subtitle or the title. In that case, you can use any of these 3 alignment properties. And that's it for this video. Hope you enjoyed it. See you in the next one. Bye. Hello everyone, Surya from Design Plus Code. In this video, I'll be showing you how to work with gradients and background blur. Let's dive right in. As you can see here, I have a very simple UI in front of me. And this is great, but if I want to make this more fun and playful, I can simply do that by using gradients. And let me show you how. Let's start by drawing a rectangle inside the frame with a width of 375 and a height of 540. And move this rectangle below all the layers. Once you have this, let's take some time to arrange all the elements neatly. Great. Before moving to the gradient, I would like to quickly add a corner radius of 30 to my rectangle. Now head over to the fill option and open the color picker. Let's start by choosing a nice vibrant color. I'll be picking purple, and this will be our primary color for the gradient. Now using the drop down, let's switch to linear from solid. Select the second color and set the opacity to 100%. Now the second color, to be safe, always pick an analogous color, which means a color that is nearby to the primary color. In this case, purple is the primary color, and the color nearby are pink, cherry red. On the other side, it is blue and green. If you go any further, the colors may not look good and the gradients will be disturbed. I wouldn't suggest doing this unless you're comfortable with colors. Anyway, let's choose the cherry red right here. And as you can see, this already looks so much better than the UI we had before. If you have struggles working with gradients, I would suggest you to go online and check Gradient. Here you have a collection of gradients that you can use in your projects. All you have to do is hover on a color and you can copy the code and use it directly in Figma. Anyway, let's go back to Figma. Now that we know how to work with gradients, let's look at how to work with images. So I'm going to quickly drag and drop the image I downloaded. And by the way, this image is from Unsplash. If you don't know what Unsplash is, it's a huge library of photos that you can download and use it on your projects for free. Now let's switch back to Figma. I'm going to hide this image for a second and zoom in on my frame. Let's go ahead and duplicate the gradient rectangle and put all of this into the rectangle and group it together. Now command click inside the group and select the rectangle too and turn it into a mask. Once done, unhide the image and place it inside this mask. Let's zoom out quickly and make this image smaller. So I'm going to quickly align it to the center of the frame. And by holding to Option and Shift, I'm going to resize this just like this. Now let's zoom in. Let's hide the illustration and now you can see it more clear. So I'm going to make this a little bit small so that it fits the frame perfectly. Awesome. Now you can see there's a bit of contrast issue going on with the background and the foreground content, which is the text. And you could fix this by changing the color, of course, to white. And obviously you can see this doesn't work. And what you do in this kind of situation, this is where you can use background blur. And let me show you how to do it. Now let's lock both the image and the information layer, draw a rectangle, place this inside the mask layer above the image and make sure it is aligned to the bottom with equal sizes on all 4 sides of the information. So 30 from the top, 30 from the left and right and the bottom. Now that we have this, let's go ahead and set the fill to black. Let's set the opacity of the fill to 50%. Let's go over to FX and click on this plus icon. Once you have this, let's use the drop down and switch to background blur and let's set the blur value to 30. As you can see, this looks better. Now all you have to do is select the information layer and using the selection colors change this to white. And now you can see there's a better contrast between foreground and background content. You could experiment more with this by either increasing or decreasing the opacity value of the fill and the background blur value as well. And that's the end of the video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. See you in the next one. Bye. Hello everyone, Surya from Design Plus Code. In this video, I'll be showing you how to make your designs adaptive to different screen sizes. Before starting, I would like you to head on to Human Interface Guidelines and read about adaptivity and layout. Here you can find all the screen sizes and dimensions of the Apple device, and this can be really helpful if you're designing your app for both iPhone and iPad. And adapting your design means you'll be reaching wider audience since both iPhone and iPad users will be able to use your apps. So let's get started. As you can see here, I have a very simple layout and I want this to be translated to iPad. Since the layout is not going to change, all I want to do is resize. But you can see this is not adapting. This is because we don't have the proper constraints and auto layout setup. And if you have proper constraints set up, it will only take a matter of minutes to adapt your designs. And let me show you how to do that. As you can see here in this page, I have laid out all the elements from this design and we'll be going step by step and I'll be showing you how to set up the auto layout and constraints so that everything will be adaptive. So let's get started by creating a frame. So I'm going to press F on my keyboard and select this iPhone 11 Pro screen. Let's start by setting up the background color. So I'm going to quickly paste in my background color. Once I have pasted this, I'm going to quickly bring in my left action items. So I want this to be 40 pixels, 44 pixels from the top and 20 pixels from the left. And then I'll be bringing my right element and this will be 44 pixels from the top as well and 20 pixels from the right. Once you have this, let's select both of the elements and press Shift A and this will create an auto layout for me. Now let's go to the auto layout options and go to the alignment items and switch this to space between from packed. Now once you have this, let's head over to the constraint options and pin the elements both to left and right. Once you have done this, if you resize the frame, you can see now if the elements are adaptive. And this is what we'll be going to do for all the elements. Set up auto layout and set up the constraints, which will make your designs adaptive. Moving on, let's bring in our illustration and align it to the center of the frame and have a margin of 30 pixels from the top. Once done, let's bring in our course details into the frame. So I'm going to quickly drag it and align it to the center of the frame and set up a 20 pixels gap between the illustration and the course information. Once you have this, let's select both of the elements and press Shift A to add auto layout. Now let's head over to the auto layout option and set the padding value to 30 and align it to the center and top of the frame like so. Now let's add a fill. So I'm going to quickly go to styles and pick a gradient from my design system. Now that we have this, I'm going to put this layer below so that the buttons are visible at the top. Once you have this, there's not enough contrast between the text and the background color. So I'm going to select all my text that is black and change the color to white using the selection colors. Now it's time to set the constraints. Let me go to the constraints section and change this to fixed and pin the elements to both left and right. And now if I resize this, you can see only the background is being adaptive, but not the content itself. To fix this, let's head over to the auto layout options and set the alignment of the items to middle center. Now, if I select the frame and resize it, you can see my content and the background is adaptive. Now, the one last thing that we need to do is bring in our text content. So I'm going to quickly move this inside the frame and align it to the center of the frame and have a margin top of 24 pixels from the cover itself. Once I have this, I'm going to pin the element to both left and right. And now everything will be completely adaptive. Let's check it. I'm going to select the frame and switch the frame size to iPad mini. And as you can see, my design is adaptive. Let's try switching to iPad Pro 12-inch. And as you can see, the design is completely adaptive. And that's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. See you in the next one. Bye. Hello everyone, Surya from Design Plus Code. In this video, I'll be showing you how to iterate your designs and things to keep in mind while designing for iOS. As you can see here, I have a UI and this has some flaws which is fixable. So today, together, let's go through and iterate on this UI. And also learn some of the do's and don'ts when it comes to designing for iOS. I'm going to start by creating a frame next to this, and here we'll start on iterating this UI. So I'm going to quickly copy the background color and paste it right here. And let's also bring in the status bar. Once we have this, let's begin iterating. Let's start from the nav bar. This has 5 elements: settings, title, caption, search, and account. The settings and account can be put together as one element. The search looks like a button that will either send user to a new page or open an overlay and let them search. And this feels like it only creates an extra layer. You can either have a search bar or move this to the tab bar so that it is more reachable to the user. And this will enhance the user experience. Now the title and the caption doesn't seem to fit within the Apple's design language. Plus, it's a custom navbar, so it might take a lot of time for developers to recreate this from scratch. And that's okay if you're working with a large team, but this can be really a barrier if you're working in a small team. Now that we know the problem, let's go ahead and fix them. I'm going to copy the title and paste this inside the frame, move it to the top left with 20 pixels margin. Now, before moving any further, I would like you to go to the Figma Community tab and search for iOS UI Kit and duplicate this file. And enable this as a library. Once done, head back to the file, switch to the Assets tab and open the Assets catalog, and here enable the iOS UI Kit. And this will allow you to use the system fonts and colors that Apple uses on its platform. Now let's head over to the text properties and open the styles menu and scroll all the way down when you find the large default and set this to large title bold. Now let's fix the alignment here quickly. Awesome. Now that we have this, I'm going to copy the caption text and paste it inside here and move this to the left with 20 pixels margin and set this above the title. Let's have a space of 8 pixels and also a margin of 20 from the top. As you can notice, the text is too small for the caption, and also there's not enough contrast ratio between the background color and the text color. And let's fix this. So I'm going to increase the font size from 11 to 13 and also open the color styles menu and set this to system label color secondary. And now things are looking much better. Now let's go ahead and bring in this avatar and paste it right inside here and align it to right here at the right with 20 pixels margin. Let's also align it with the text like so. Now, if you may wonder where we are going to put the search, I'm going to switch to the Assets tab and go to iOS tab bar and drag and drop this into my frame and align it to the bottom of my frame. Now let's go ahead and disable the grid and also select all the inactive tabs and set this to system gray 1. And this is where we'll be adding our search since it is more reachable to the users. But I'm not going to change all the icons because this may take too long, so I'm going to leave it like this. Now that we have fixed our navbar, let's move on to the card. The very first thing I can notice here are the rounded corners. They are way too much. The rounded corners should not be more than 30 pixels. The second thing is the drop shadow and the visual inside the card, as this can affect the performance way too much. And this is not worth the risk unless you're having a huge team who can specially focus their time on solving these problems. The third thing is the hierarchy between the text, as both of the texts have the same color. Another thing is the avatar being in the middle, which doesn't make a lot of sense. And the final thing is the whole experience of this card. Is this card only going to show the video since we have the play button here, or it will also allow me to view the text content if I click outside this play button. And to fix this, I'm going to use a very simple UI which was already made. And this is much better than this, as it has much better text contrast ratio, hierarchy, and all the elements are well laid out. And also, since this doesn't make use of heavy drop shadows or colors, so this won't affect the performance of the app. Moving on to the next part is the section title. The text here is too big and also the link is too small. Since this is too small, oftentimes the touch may miss. And also there's no margin on the right, but there's margin on the left. Let's fix this. I'm going to copy this and paste this inside the frame with a margin of 30 pixels from the card. Let's first add a margin from the right, 20 pixels. Great. Now let's bump up the link size to 15. And let's change the text style for this. So I'm going to open the text style menu and scroll to a large default section and set this to headline. And now this looks much better. Now the final thing that we need to fix is the section list itself. The very first problem I notice is this has way too much rounded corners, just like the card. And also there's not enough contrast ratio between the background color and the footnote color. And the final issue is the lists are inside a card, which is not necessary and seems to be occupying too much of a space. So I'm going to only copy the list and the separator and paste this inside the frame right here and align it to the left with 20 pixels margin and also 20 pixels margin from the top, and set the size of the separator to the size of the section, which is 244. And now you can see there's lots of wasted space, which we can make use by adding another column. So I'm going to select all this and group them together, duplicate and move this like so with 20 pixels margin. Now we have a very minor issue that I would like to point out, which are the sizes of the separator. iOS usually uses 0.5. But right now we have one, so I'm going to fix this. And now this looks much better. Now we just need to increase the contrast of the footnote. So I'm going to command select all of the footnote, go over to fill and open the styles and set this to system gray 1. And now this has better contrast to the background. And as you can notice how much of an improvement we have made. And this is the most important part when it comes to designing. You have to simplify things. It's not about the aesthetics, but how the app works. And that's the end of the video. Hope you enjoyed it. See you in the next one. Bye. Hello everyone, Surya from Design Plus Code. In this video, I'll be showing you how to design with bottom card UI to keep your content reachable. So let's get started. As you've been noticing in the recent times, screens are getting bigger and bigger, and it's very hard for users to interact with the devices. A solution for this is to have most of the interactive elements at the bottom of the screen. And the bottom sheet UI exactly does that for us. As you can see, I've collected some inspiration of apps that uses the bottom sheet UI. And this has been getting more common in the recent times as many apps start to embrace this bottom sheet, which helps them increase the user experience by keeping all the elements to the bottom so that it is easily reachable by the thumb of the user. And the bottom sheet has many use cases, as you can see from the examples that I'm showing on the screen. As you can see, the New York Times app uses the bottom sheet to display the audio playback controls, while the YouTube app uses the bottom sheet to display video controls for the users, and Instagram uses to provide users different options. And the best part about bottom sheet is they're easy to interact with. You don't have to teach users how to use them. As you can see here, there are little handles here which indicates users that they can dismiss the bottom sheet UI by just swiping down. Now let's switch to Figma, and here you can see the Apple Maps UI. And this too makes use of the bottom sheet UI. And let's learn how to do this. Before getting into the design itself, I would like you to head on to the Figma community and search for iOS UI Kit. And this was created by Joey Banks, and duplicate this. Once duplicated, you can head on to the file and publish this as a library. So let's get started with the designing. So I'm going to switch the file here, and as you can see here, I already have the maps background image, which you can get it from the assets. Let's get started by placing a rectangle, set the width to 375 and the height to 322 and align it to the bottom of the frame. Now set the rounded corner value to 10 and enable the independent corners. Click on these three dots and set the smoothing corner value to 60. Now let's go over to fill and set the color value to FD, FD, FD and the opacity to 90%. Now let's head over to the effects tab and click on the plus icon. Using this drop down, select background blur and open the settings and set the blur value to 30. And by doing this, we have created a translucency effect which hints users that there is a background content, and also creating a separation between background and foreground elements. Now let's go ahead and draw another rectangle, set the width to 35 and the height to 5, and let's set the rounded corner value to 12, align it to the center of the frame and move it to the top of the sheet and just have a 7 pixels margin. Let's go ahead and lock both of the layers so that we don't accidentally move them. Now before moving on, let's go ahead and select the sheet, add a drop shadow, set the blur value to 20 and the color opacity to 10. And now we can proceed adding our UI elements. Now let's add a text which will be our title. Let's align this 20 pixels from the left and 30 pixels from the top of the sheet. Now let's head over to the text properties and align the text to left and change the text to SF Pro Display, set the font size to 24, the weight to bold, and the letter spacing to 0.24. Now let's duplicate this text, move it below with 8 pixels gap from the title, and we'll be using this as the body text. So I'm going to quickly paste the text here. Remember when we published the iOS UI kit, let's make sure that it is enabled. So let's go to the Assets tab, open the Assets catalog, and enable the iOS UI kit. Once you have enabled this, let's go over to the text properties and click on the 4 dots, and here you can see all the text styles that Apple uses for their platform. Now let's scroll all the way to the large default section and select the body text styling. Now that we have this, let's duplicate this and use it as our secondary text. Make sure that it has a gap of 1 pixels from the body text. And I'm going to quickly paste in my secondary text. Now we have to create some hierarchy between them. So I'm going to go over to Fill, open the Style menu, and set the color to System Gray 1. Now I'm going to select all of the text and press Command G to group them together. Now let's go ahead and create a close button that will allow users to get out of this information state. So let's press O on our keyboard and draw a circle and set the width and height to 30. Let's align it to the top of the text and move this to right with 20 pixels margin. Now let's head over to the Fill section and open the Color Styles menu, scroll all the way to the down and select Fill Color Light Tertiary. Now that we have this, let's go ahead and add our icon. For that, I'll be switching to SF Symbols and search for Multiply, which I'll be using as the close button. Now let's paste it inside the frame. I'm going to zoom in a little bit and move this inside the circle. I'm going to set the bounding box to 30 by 30 and align it with the circle. Now let's head over to the text properties and unlink the style. Set the text alignment to center and also the vertical alignment to the center. Let's set the font weight to semi-bold and let's choose the color as System Gray 1. Awesome. Now let's zoom out. Now let's add a button that will help users get the directions. So I'm going to command select this text right here, copy it and paste it outside the group. I'm going to switch the styling to headline from body and rename this to direction. Now that we have this, I'm going to press Shift A to add an auto layout. Once added the auto layout, let's go ahead and click on the fill and add a color. Let's set the color to System Blue and the text color to white. Let's set the corner radius of this to 8 pixels. Now let's head over to the auto layout option and align the text to the middle and remove the left and right padding and set the top and bottom padding to 18 pixels. Now let's resize this to a width of 335 and align it to the center of the frame and have a margin top of 20 pixels from the text itself. And the one last thing that we need to add are the images. So let's draw a rectangle with a width of 210 and a height of 210 as well. Once we have this, enable the independent corners and set the top left to 8 pixels. Great. Now let's duplicate this and move this to the side, and let's make sure that this has an 8 pixel gap from this rectangle and align it to the bottom like this with a 20 pixels margin from the right, and set the top left corner radius value to 0 and the top right corner radius value to 8. Now let's divide the height value by 3, duplicate this and put this below with 8 pixels gap and remove the corner radius of the top right. And to apply the images, I'll be using a plugin called Unsplash. You can install this by heading onto the Figma community tab, switch to plugins and search for Unsplash. And here you're going to see the result and click install. Once you have installed this, head back to the design file, select all 3 rectangles, press Command / and search for Unsplash. And you should see the model open up. And now let's search for Gardens by the Bay and you'll have the images show up. And all you have to do is select the images that you like. Once selected, click on the Insert button and this will insert the images for you. And boom, we have created the bottom card UI of the Maps app. And that's the end of the video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. See you in the next video. Bye! Hello everyone, Surya from Design Plus Code. In this video, I'll be showing you how to make the best use of iOS UI Kit. Before getting started, I would like you to head on to the Figma Community tab and duplicate the iOS and iPadOS UI kit. Once you have duplicated this, you can head on to the file and switch to the Assets tab and click on this icon, which will open the Assets catalog, and here you're gonna publish the library. Once done, let's head back to the design file, switch to the Assets tab and open the Assets catalog. You're gonna enable the iOS and iPadOS UI kit. Once enabled, you can see all the UI elements right here. And to use them, you can simply drag and drop these elements. Anyway, let's switch to the layers and press F on our keyboard and select the iPhone 11 Pro frame and set the rounded corners to 30. Once done, switch to the Assets tab and here search for status and drag and drop the iPhone 10 status bar right here inside the frame. Let's align it to the top of the frame. Awesome. Now to add the label, I'm going to press T on my keyboard and paste the text. Once you have it, let's align it 30 pixels from the status bar and 20 pixels left from the frame itself. Let's go over to the text properties, and here if you click on the 4 dots, you can see the style pop up, and these text styles are coming from the iOS UI kit itself. Now let's scroll and find the large default section. Here it is, and choose the subhead. Now let's unlink the style and customize it a little bit. Let's set the font weight to semi bold and go over to type details and set the letter casing to uppercase. Let's close this and duplicate this text by pressing Command D, move it 8 pixels below. Now let's change the text to today, and once you have this, let's go over to type details and disable the uppercase. Once done, let's go over to text styles and navigate to the large section and set this to large title bold. Now for the avatar, I'm going to press O on my keyboard and place a circle, set the width and height to 38 and align it to the right side with 20 pixel margin. Once I have this, I'm going to go to the fill properties, switch this to image from solid, and I'm going to choose my image. And once done, what you're going to do is select both of these text layers and press Shift A, which will add an auto layout. Once done, let's also select the frame that contains the text and the avatar and set an auto layout. Now let's head over to the alignment and padding options in the auto layout and set the items to space between and align all of them to the bottom. Great. Now let's create hierarchy between these two texts. I'm going to select the label, head on to the fill properties and click on the 4 dots to open the styles menu. Here you can see all the colors from the UI kit, and let's scroll all the way to the down and find system label color, and here I'm going to choose the label color light secondary. And this is the best part about using an UI kit, because you don't have to start anything from scratch since everything is already there for you. All you have to do is focus on designing your ideas. Anyway, let's move on to designing our card. So I'm going to press R on my keyboard and draw a rectangle, set the width to 335 and the height to 400 and align it to the center of the frame. Let's have a 30 pixel gap from the title itself. Now that we have this, let's set the rounded corners to 13, open the individual corners and click on these 3 dots, set the smoothing corner value to 60%, which will give you the iOS rounded corners. Now let's head on to fill properties, open the color picker and switch this to image from solid, and let's choose an image. So I already have some images, so I'm going to quickly apply that. Now head over to the effects tab and create a drop shadow and open the effect settings, set the blur value to 60, color opacity to 30% and the Y value to 10. Now let's go ahead and group the image by pressing Command G. By holding on to Command, I'm going to select both of these texts, copy this and place this inside the group that has the image and align it to the top left with 20 pixels margin. Now as you notice, there's not enough contrast between the background and the text. Let's head over to selection colors and change the label color from light to dark, and now we have a better contrast. Let's also set the black color to white. Now, the advantage of using system colors is you don't have to worry about accessibility, since Apple will take care of that for you. Same goes for system fonts. And let's take a look at that. If you see here, there are many sections, and these are some of the text sizes that Apple has within the iPhone. And let's say if the user has set the text style to X large, Apple will automatically switch your large title from 34 points to 36. And this won't happen if you're using a custom font style. Anyway, let's set set this to title 1. Unlink this text layer and change the font weight to bold. I'm going to quickly rename this text to learn to design and code, and also the label to app of the day. Now let's go ahead and add our app information. So I'm going to quickly bring in my icon, set the width and height to 48, and for the time being, I'm going to design this outside. So I'm going to quickly zoom in right here like this. Okay, now let's add our text. So I'm going to press T and paste my text. Let's go over to the text styles and set this to body. Awesome. Now let's add a description. So I'm going to duplicate this text, move it below, and paste in my text quickly. Let's go over to text styles and set this to footnote and set the color style to system gray 1. Now let's select both of the text layers, press Shift A to add an auto layout, and also select the icon and again add an auto layout. Let's set the alignment of items to left middle. Now let's go ahead and select the body text. Unlink the text styling and set the font weight from regular to medium. Now that we have this, we need to create a button that can link the users to the app page. Let's start by adding a text that says get and go over to this text styles and set this to subhead. Once you have done this, let's unlink the text styling, go to type details and set this to uppercase and change the font weight from regular to bold and also set the fill color to system blue. Now let's press Shift A to create an auto layout, set the alignment of the item to middle and the top padding to 5, bottom padding to 5 and both of the left and right padding to 20. Now let's head over to the fill and open the styles menu and set the color to system gray 6. Once we have this, let's set the rounded corner value to 32 and select both of the button and the app information and create an auto layout. And head over to the auto layout options, align the items to middle, set this to space between. Let's have the top and bottom margin to 16 and the left and right to 20. As you can see, the layout is overlapping and we can fix this by changing the width of the auto layout to 335. Once we have this, let's add a fill and set this to white. Now let's zoom out a little bit and move this to the layer here. And I'm going to switch to the layers and put this inside the group that contains the image. And now let's duplicate this image, remove the drop shadow and mask this. And now we have our card. Now the one last thing that we're missing is our tab bar at the below. So I'm going to switch to the assets tab right here. And here you can find the tab bar. You can simply drag and drop into the frame and align it to the center of the frame as well as to the bottom. And as you can see, there are some red boxes in the tab bar and you can disable this by opening the layer and select the tab, and here you can just hide the layout grid. Now let's select the unactive tab bar items and go to selection colors and set this to system gray 1 from system blue. And it's that simple. As you saw, it was effortless to design this layout using the UI kit. And that's it for this video. Hope you enjoyed it. See you in the next one. Bye. Hello everyone, Surya from Design Plus Code. In this video, I'll be showing you how to design iOS app icon. Before getting started, I would like you to head on to Human Interface Guidelines and check out the app icon sizes, since Apple asks you to provide different sizes. For example, if you're designing the icon for iPhone, you should be designing at 60 pixels and export it at 3x and 2x. But for iPad, it should be designed at 83.5 pixel and exported at 2x. And you should be also providing assets for spotlight, settings, and notifications. And here are the sizes you'd be wanting to design the icon at. So this is something definitely worth checking out. Now let's switch to Figma and start designing our app icon. I'm going to start by placing a frame by pressing F on my keyboard and lock the proportions and set the width and height to 60 pixels. Now by pressing 2, I'm going to quickly zoom into the selection. I'm going to start by adding a background color. So let's set the fill color to our app accent color. It is very important for you to stick to the brand colors so people can easily recognize your app through colors. Anyway, coming back. A solid color doesn't look interesting, so I'm going to open the color picker and switch this to linear from solid. I'm going to click on the second color, hide the opacity to 100%. Now let's set the secondary color to an analogous color. In this case, it's either pink or blue. I'm going to stick with pink. Now, I'm going to switch from Higgs to HSB value, set the saturation level to 54 and the brightness to 100. Now that we did this, we have contrasting colors. The purple lies in the darker side and the pink is on the brighter side, which makes it more interesting to look at. Now let's go ahead and set the frame corner radius to 13 pixels, enable independent corners, click on the three dots and set the corner splitting value to 60%, which gives the iOS rounded corners. Moving on, let's draw a rectangle, set the width and height to 54, align it to the center of the frame. Now let's go ahead and remove the fill, set the layer blending mode to soft light and add a stroke and set the width to 0.5 and set the rounded corners to 13 and also set the smoothing corner value to 60%. Once done, let's go to the effects and add a drop shadow, set the color to white and set the fill opacity to 50% and the Y value to 0.3. And let's drop down the blur value to 0. Great. Now again, let's go ahead and add another effect. This time it's going to be inner shadow. Set the blur value to 2 and the Y value to 2 as well. Now that we have this, I'm going to draw a circle, set the width and height to 48 and align it to the center of the frame. Now let's go ahead and copy the layer style of the rectangle by pressing Command Option C and paste it on the circle by pressing Command Option V, and let's increase the stroke size to 5. Now let's duplicate the circle by pressing Command D, set the width and height to 36 and align it to the center of the frame and drop down the stroke value to 0.5. Let's go ahead and select this circle and remove the inner shadow. Now let's go ahead and select all three layers and set the stroke opacity to 35%. Now that we have this, I'm going to paste in my logo and align it to the center of the frame optically. And that's it. By adding simple gradients and UI elements, you can make your app icon more interesting. I suggest you to experiment and play more. That's the end of the video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. See you in the next one. Bye. Hello everyone, Surya from Design Plus Code. In this video, we'll be looking at designing for iPad. Before getting into this video, I would like you to check the designing for sidebar tutorial so that you can know how I designed the sidebar that I have on my screen right now. So let's begin designing. The very first thing I'll be adding is the back button. So I'm going to press T and add a text that says back. Now let's head on to the text properties and open the text tiles and navigate all the way to large default and set this to callout text. Once done, I'm going to unlink this and set the font weight to medium. And if you're wondering where the text tiles are coming from, they are from the iOS UI kit that we published as a library at the start of the video. Now we need to have an icon. For that, I'll be switching to SF symbols, and here we can search for chevron and copy the chevron left. Once you have copied, let's switch back to Figma and paste it here. Let's move over here and set the font weight to 22 pixels. Once done, let's zoom in a little bit and align both of them together. Before moving on, let's quickly bring the icon inside the frame and make sure that we have a gap of 6 pixels. Now let's press Shift A to create an auto layout and align this item 54 pixels from the top and 24 pixels from the sidebar. Now let's head over to the selection colors, and using the color picker tool, I'm going to choose the accent color from the sidebar. Now that we have this, let's focus on adding our main UI elements. So I'm going to start by drawing a rectangle for the cover. Set the width and height to 300 and the corner radius value to 30%. Now let's align it to the left by 24 pixels from the sidebar and 30 pixels from the back button. Perfect. Now let's head on to the fill properties, and using the color picker, I'm going to choose the accent color. Now let's change the color from solid to linear. I'm going to choose the second color, increase the opacity to 100%. Now let's pick a nice analogous color. If you don't know what analogous colors are, it is the color next to the main color. In this case, it's purple, so the analogous color will be either pink or blue. Let's go with the blue, and I'm going to decrease the brightness to 80%. Now, I would like to mention one quick thing. If you're just getting started with colors, I would highly suggest to use the HSB values instead of X, as this gives more control over the colors. Now, let's go ahead and add our illustration. So I'm going to paste my illustration quickly and align it to the center of this cover and group them together. If you don't know where to find illustrations, there are some good resources out there where you can find illustrations for free, and some of them are shape.so, upset design, and blush.design. Feel free to check them out. Now let's go ahead and add a Swift UI logo right here. For that, I'll be pressing O on my keyboard and draw a circle and set the width and height to 32 pixels. Now let's head on to the fill properties and set the color to a nice dark blue, like so. Once done, let's switch to SF symbols, and here let's search for Swift. Once you see the icon, press Command C to copy, switch back to Figma, and paste the icon. Let's move this into this circle and let's make sure that the icon is inside the frame. Now let's select both of the layers and align the icon to the center of the ellipse using the alignment properties. Now let's go ahead and set the fill color of the logo to 00CFFD. Awesome. Now let's group them together by pressing Command G. Moving on, let's add our caption text. So I'm going to press T on the keyboard and add a text, like so, and align it with 40 pixels margin from the cover. Let's go over to the text properties, scroll all the way to the large default section and set this to footnote. I'd quickly like to mention that there's not a really big difference in terms of text sizes between the iOS and iPad, so it is perfectly fine to use the iOS text styles for iPad. Anyway, let's go ahead and unlink the text style, set this to medium weight, and go over to type details and set the letter casing to uppercase. Great. Now let's make sure that the gap here is only 16 pixels. Great. Now let's go ahead and duplicate this text and use it for our title. Before, I'm going to quickly rename the text to the course title and make sure it has an alignment of 40. Before moving on, I would like to quickly fix something, so I'm going to select both of the text and set the text alignment to left. Now let's go over to the text properties, scroll to the large default section and set this to large title bold. Now I'm going to select both the title and the caption and press Shift A to add an auto layout and go over to the options and set the item gap to 8 pixels. Now let's Command select the title and press Command D to duplicate this, and I'm going to quickly rename this text to the author of this course. Let's go to the text styles and set this to title 3. Now that we have this, I'm going to go over to fill and set the color to the accent color, and by choosing the accent color we can have better text hierarchy. Let's go ahead and add our description text, so I'm going to press T and paste my description text. Great. Now let's set the bounding box width to 420 and make sure that the text is aligned 40 pixels from the cover and 30 pixels from these texts. Now let's head over to the text properties and change the title from title 3 to subhead. Let's also go to the fill color, open the styles menu and set the color to system gray 1. As you can notice, the line height of the subhead text is a little too tight and this can often cause problems to some users when reading. So let's go ahead and fix this. I'm going to unlink the text style and go over to line height and set this to 150%, and now this looks much better. Great. Now let's go ahead and create a button. For that, I'll be pressing T on my keyboard and add a text that says download. To zoom in a little bit so that I can see what is happening closely. Now let's head over to the text properties and open the text styles and set this to body in the large default. Great. Once we have done this, I'm going to unlink the text style and set the weight to semi-bold. Now let's go ahead and find our icon. So I'm going to switch to SF symbol and here I'm going to search for download. Let's copy this icon and switch back to Figma and paste it right here. I'm going to select both the icon and the text and press Shift A. Head over to the auto layout options and set the item gap to 8 pixels and also align all the items to the middle, set the top and the bottom padding value to 12 pixels. Now let's go ahead and resize the width of the frame to 220 pixels. Once done, let's zoom out and select the frame and head over to the fill properties and create a new fill. Let's go ahead and open the color picker and choose the color of the sidebar background and set the rounder corners value to 10, enable the independent corners and open the smooth cornering options and set the value to 60%. Now let's make sure that this is inside the frame and align it to the text with 30 pixels margin. Now let's go ahead and select all of these elements, group them together and align it with the cover at the top. Now to maintain visual consistency, I'm going to select the course cover, set it to the same height as the container that holds all the course information. Awesome. Now the one last thing we need to do is add the curriculum section at the bottom. Since we already have a curriculum section built for the iPhone, I'm going to take that and modify for the larger screen instead of starting it from scratch. So now I'm going to switch to the design that contains the curriculum menu and copy them, switch back to the iPad design and paste them right here. And let's make sure that this is aligned perfectly, 24 pixels from the sidebar and 60 pixels from the cover. Now I'm going to click on the curriculum and set the auto layout direction from vertical to horizontal and resize the width to 802 and go over to alignment of the items and set this to space between, and boom, we have adapted this section to the iPad screen. Now let's do the same for the section title. Since this is already in the horizontal direction, I'm just going to change the width from 335 to 802, and there you go. Now let's go ahead and select the section and make sure it has a 30 pixels margin from the section title. And that's it, we are done. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. See you in the next one. Bye. Hello everyone, Surya from Design Plus Code. Today I will be showing you how to design the sidebar for iPad. Let's get started. As you can see here, iPad has a very large screen real estate, and this can be really helpful for us to show the sidebar, as users can quickly jump between different app screens since all the navigational items are reachable using the thumb. Also, the advantage of using the sidebar is you can make use of the whole screen. As you can see in this screenshot, there's no sidebar. This is because sidebar gives full control to the user, which gives them the option to show or hide the sidebar using this icon at the top left. Sidebar can also be useful when your app has too many navigational items, as this allows users to customize and personalize the sidebar according to their likings. As it allows them to hide and show navigational items, they can also reorder the navigational items, which cannot be done if you're using a tab bar. And it is also very important to know whether to use the sidebar or not, because if your app doesn't have more than 5 navigational items, I would suggest you to stick with the tab bar. Now that we know this, I'm going to switch to the design file and show you how to design the sidebar. Make sure that you have a frame with a width of 1194 and a height of 834. I'm going to start by pressing R on my keyboard and drawing a rectangle that takes the full height of the frame, and set the width to 320, which is the width of the sidebar itself. Now let's quickly select the frame and set the rounded corners to 20. Awesome. Now let's set the color for the sidebar. I'm going to go to the fill, and using the color picker tool, I'm going to pick the background color. Once done, I'm going to switch to HSB and drop down the brightness from 100 to 95. Great, as now we can distinguish the sidebar and the background. Next up, we'll need to have an icon to show and hide the sidebar. For that, I'll be pressing O on my keyboard and drawing a circle with a width and height of 32. And set the margin from top to 60 and from left to 20. Now let's go over to fill and set the color to white. Now we'll be needing an icon, and for that, I'll be switching to SF Symbols. If you don't know what SF Symbols is, it is an icon collection designed by Apple for its platform. You can download SF Symbols by going to developer.apple.com. Here you can see the app and download it for the Mac. Now let's head back to SF Symbols and search for the sidebar icon. Once you find the icon, press Command C to copy the icon, go back to Figma and paste your icon. It's that simple. Now, since this is a font, to scale the icon, all you have to do is increase the font size. So I'm going to set the font size to 17 and move this inside this circle. You can also change the stroke width of the icon by changing the weight. Let's say bold, the stroke gets bigger, and if you set this to thin, the stroke gets lighter. Anyway, let's set this to regular. Now, to align this icon to the center, I'm going to match the width of the icon to the width of the circle, which is 32 by 32. Let's set the width to 32 and the height to 32 as well, and align it to the circle perfectly. Once you have aligned this, let's set the horizontal alignment of the text to center and the vertical alignment of the text to middle, and boom, you have your icon aligned to the center. Now quickly, I'm going to bring this icon inside the frame and group both of the icon and the circle together. Now let's zoom out and you have the icon to show and hide the sidebar. The next step is to add our navigational items. Let's zoom in again so that we can see closely what we are doing. I'm going to copy paste this icon and align it right here. Now let's set this to auto width and let's duplicate this by option dragging. Let's now double click and change the icon into text. So I'm going to type in learn more and make sure that the font is aligned to the left and also to the top. Now let's set the font weight to medium. Now let's move this text 12 pixels away from the font. Now I'm going to select both of this and press Shift A to have an auto layout. Why I'm doing this, I'll mention this later. Now let's go to the auto layout options and set the padding to 12 and also the item alignment to left center. Let's select the text inside the auto layout and set its width to 228. Now select the parent frame and set the rounded corner value to 10 and add a fill. And this is why we added the auto layout, so that we can have the selected state without having to create another rectangle. Now set the fill color to your app accent color. In this case, I'll be going with a purple. Using selection colors, I'm going to set the text color and the icon color to white, and boom, you have your navigational item. Now let's duplicate this 4 times by pressing Command D. Now go ahead and select all 5 items and create an auto layout. Now let's go ahead and select the items that are not active and select all of them and just hide the fill. Using selection colors, set the text and icon color to black from white. Now let's zoom out and I'm going to quickly rename these items. Now I'll be quickly setting the icons. Make sure that you pick the appropriate icons and always pick the fill icons. And the final thing I'll be doing is selecting all of these icons, and by pressing I, I'll hit the color picker and choose the accent color. Now I'm going to quickly close this frame and make sure it is 16 pixels from the left. And to have another section of navigational items, you'd want to have a title. This is because the sidebar needs to stay organized. So to create a title, I'm going to press T, add my text, which will be quick links. Once you have the text, make sure that it is 16 pixels from the left and 36 pixels from the top. Let's set the font to SF Pro Display since our font size will be 20 pixels, and also change the font weight to semi-bold. And let's go ahead and duplicate this navigational items and put this below and have a gap of 12 pixels from the title itself. I'm going to quickly remove one item by pressing delete. Now we'll need to have a drop down so that users can quickly collapse and expand the section. I'm going to option drag to duplicate this title and align it 20 pixels from the right. Once I have this, I'm going to go to SF symbols and search for chevron. Once you have the icon, copy the chevron down and go back to Figma and paste it. Let's make sure that we have proper alignment, which is 20, and let's set the font size to 17 and the font weight to regular, and also change the fill opacity to 60%, and boom, you have the sidebar. Make sure that you have the right names here, which I will leave it to you. And that's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. See you in the next one. Bye. Hello everyone, Surya from Design Plus Code. In this video, let's take a look at how to design widgets for iOS. Before starting, I would like you to get the Apple Widgets UI kit from Figma community. You can search on the community, and this is created by Alex. Once you have duplicated this file, open the file, and here you can find all the assets needed to create the widget, such as the mockups, the wallpapers, the icons, and everything. This can be really useful so that you don't have to start designing your widgets every time from scratch. Now, before getting into the exercise part, I would like to talk to you a little bit about widgets. It is very important for you to design your widgets in a way that it is informative, contextual, and more customizable, which allows users to personalize the widgets according to their needs. And let me tell you what I mean by that. Let's quickly take a look at the weather widget. As you can see here, the widget here displays the exact information that user wants to see. It doesn't have any unnecessary elements to distract from. And that's how you want to design your widget. Simple and useful. Keep it straightforward. Everything should be quickly glanceable. Let's take a look at another example, which is the clock widget. This allows users to pick the time zones displayed in the widget, making it more personalizable according to the user's need. One last thing I would like to mention are the widget sizes. As you can see here, the widget has 3 sizes: small, medium, and large. And it is very important to display the right amount of information based on the size of the widget. Anyway, let's get into designing. So I'm going to switch back to my design file. Let's start by drawing a rectangle with a width of 155 and a height of 155 too. Let's make sure it is 22 pixels from the left and 74 from the top of the screen. Set the rounded corners to 22. Make sure to set smooth corners using the individual corner radius. Once done, let's disable this. Now let's head over to fill and have a nice background color. So I'm going to switch to HSB instead of hex because this gives me more control over the colors. I'm going to set the hue value to 220, the saturation to 5, and then the brightness to 100. Great. Now, before moving forward, I would like to quickly think about what information that I want to show in my widget. So the Design Code app is mainly used for watching videos and reading the content. So it would be best if I display the recently watched videos in the widget. So it can be very useful for users to get back quickly from where they left. Now that we have the direction, let's start adding our elements to the widget. So I'm going to quickly zoom in here. By pressing T on my keyboard, I'm going to add a text called watching. Let's set the font to SF Pro Text. Set the font size to 12 pixels and the font weight to semi-bold. Let's make sure that it is 16 pixels from the left and 16 pixels from the top. Now head over to the type details and set the letter case to uppercasing. Awesome. Now that we have our caption text, this will allow users to get an idea of what information is being displayed in this widget. I'm going to press Command D to duplicate this text and move it below this, a gap of 6 pixels from the top. Let's go over to font size and increase this to 15 pixels and remove the letter casing set to uppercase. And this will be the title for the section we'll be displaying in this widget. So I'm going to quickly paste the name and make sure that the width of the bounding box is set to 123 so that we have equal number of spacing on both sides. Let's duplicate this text by pressing Command D and move it below with a top gap of 6 pixels. Now let's use this as our description for the widget. Let's drop down the font size to 13 pixels and change the weight to regular. And now let's paste in our text. We now have almost every information, but there's one thing that we need to do. Add a progress bar so that users can visually see how far they are into the section. This can be really useful. So I'm going to press R on my keyboard and draw a rectangle. Set the height to 3 and move it below the description. Let's set the rounded corners to 4 and now let's go over to fill and choose a nice vibrant color. So I'll be choosing pink. Something like this, yeah. To make it a little more interesting, I'm going to switch to linear so that I have a gradient to work with. Let me move this to the other end. So I like to keep this subtle, so I'll just increase the opacity and set the brightness to 100 and the hue to 40, and this looks good. Now another thing I would like to do is add a stroke. Let me close this color picker quickly. Set the stroke to center and set the stroke weight to 0.3. Let's also change the stroke opacity to 10%. Now I'm going to press Shift A selecting the rectangle to add an auto layout. Set the item gap to 0 and the padding to 1. So let's move this below the description with 8 pixels from the top. Now let's set the corner radius to 4 and add a fill. I'm going to open the color picker and using the eyedropper tool, select the background color. I'm going to drop down the brightness to 95 and make sure that the width of the auto layout is 123. And this will be indicating the 100% and the pink bar will be indicating the progress made so far. Awesome. Now we have a little problem, is that we don't have hierarchy between the text. So to fix that, I'm going to select the text that needs less attention, which is the description and the caption, and drop down the fill opacity to 70%. Now we have better hierarchy and contrast between the text. One last thing that we need to do is add our logo so that users can identify that this is our widget. So I'm going to press O on my keyboard to draw an ellipse, set the width and height to 24 and make sure that the padding from the right is 10 and from the top as well. Now let's set the color to black and bring in our logo. I've already exported my logo, so I'm going to simply drag and drop the logo, align it to the center of the frame and then group them together. Let's also drag and select all the elements and group them together, and boom, you have your widget ready. And that's the end of the video. Hope you enjoyed it. See you in the next one. Bye. Hi there, Surya from Design Plus Code. In this video, I'll be showing you how to work with animation and prototype your designs. Let's dive right in. Before, I would like to show you an example of the animation that we'll be creating today. As you can see here in this UI, I have a button and this is the main component, as this will be triggering our animation. As soon as I click this button, you can see the model pop in. You might have noticed already, this just doesn't come into the view. When it comes to the view, it has a spring effect and this is the hero of the animation. This can create delightfulness in the minds of users, and this is what we'll be focusing on in this video. Now let's go to our Figma file and start designing. So for an animation to happen, you'll need two states, an initial state and an end state. Let me show you what I mean by that. An initial state is a screen that is displayed before the animation happening, and an end state is a screen that is displayed after the animation has happened. And in between these two states, you have the event, which is the animation itself. Now let's go back and start animating. Let's begin by designing the end state first. For that, I'll be drawing a rectangle inside the frame, roughly the size of the screen. Once you have it, let's set the fill color to black and the opacity to 60%. Once you have this, make sure that the rectangle stays on top of all the elements. Then let's go ahead and click on the plus icon in the FX section. Using the drop down, let's set a background blur and set the blur value to 60. Once you have this, let's bring in the model and put this inside the frame and align it to the center of the frame. If you feel the blur value is too high, you can always go ahead and decrease it. It doesn't matter how much value you have, as long as there's a good amount of separation between the background and foreground content. Now let's duplicate this frame by pressing Command D. Let's name them. So the frame 1 will be before and the frame 2 will be after. Now that we have our end state, which is the frame named after, let's go ahead and design our initial state, which we'll be doing in the before screen. Now first, let's select the rectangle that has the blur and set the fill opacity to 0%. After this, let's select the model and move it all the way to the bottom of the screen so that it slides into the view. To do that quickly, I'm going to check the frame size, which is 900, select my model and set the Y position to 900, and it is perfectly aligned to the bottom of my screen. Now that we have both the state ready, it's time to start prototyping. For this, let's switch to the prototype tab. Now let's select our component that will be triggering the animation, which is the button. Select the button, click on the node, drag and connect it to the after screen, and you'll be shown with this model. This is where you'll be setting the details for the animation. Using the first option, you can set the event to happen on click, on drag, while hovering, and stuff like that. And below we have the options to customize our animation. Make sure that this is set to Smart Animate and the duration to 400 milliseconds. It's very important to keep your animation shorter, as often long animations can get in the way of users and can cause frustration, and this is something to look out for. Besides, we have the animation curves. This will help us determine how smooth the animation is, and also this is what we'll be using to create the spring animation. Let's set this to custom, and here you can see the easing curves, and I wouldn't suggest touching this at the very first try, as this is a little bit confusing, so we'll be working with the values for now. Let's set the very first value to 0.5, the second value to 1.15, and let's repeat the same, so 0.5 and then 1.15. Now you have the spring animation. Now let's check how we have done so far. You can see that by clicking on this play button up top, which will take you into the presentation mode where you can see your prototype. You can also share your prototypes to your collaborators or clients. You can simply invite them using their emails. Anyway, let's view our animation. Now, if I click this button, I can see the model coming from the bottom, and it has a spring animation. But we have one problem. We don't have a way to dismiss the model, so I cannot go back to the initial state. And let's fix that right now. Let's switch back to the design file. Here, let's plan how to dismiss the model. I want the model to be dismissed when I click outside the model itself. So we'll select the rectangle that has the blur, click on the node and connect it to the before screen. By default, Figma will take the settings from the previous animation, and that's why you have all the settings that we did for the spring animation. But we don't want that. Let's set this to ease in, ease out, and the duration remains 400 milliseconds. Now let's view the presentation. Now if I click outside the model, the model is dismissed. When I click on the button, the model appears with a spring animation and it gets dismissed when I click outside. One last thing I would like to say is to always keep your animations subtle and smooth, because good animations can enhance the user experience and bad animations can create distraction. That's the end of the video. Hope you enjoyed it. See you in the next one. Bye.
Hello everyone, this is Dan from Design Plus Code, and today I'm going to show you how to design an app clip using Figma. So are you guys ready? Let's begin. So the first thing we will do is to go to Figma, and over there we will create a frame. But we need to give to this frame the right size. So for the width, I will type 402, and for the height, 464. Okay, nice. Now, as you can see in my right side, we have some of the elements that we will use to create our app clip. But we will come back to this later. Now, let's add a background. So I will draw a new rectangle, and let's give to this rectangle some rounded corners. So over here, I will type 38. Okay, perfect. Now, I will change its color, and I will give some linear gradient, and the bottom gradient, I will just put it in the left bottom corner. Okay, perfect. Now, I will select the top gradient, and over there, I will change to this color, 4316 dB. Okay, nice. Now, I will select the bottom color, and also I will change its color to 9076 E7. Okay, perfect. And make sure to give an opacity of 100%. Okay, nice. Now, I will select this rectangle, and I will just make a copy of it. So press Command D. Okay, perfect. Now, let's select this illustration, so we can put it as a decor in our background. And I will just place it in the right size. So you can go to the x-axis and you can write 805.15, and in the y-axis 593.27. Okay, then let's select the illustration and the new rectangle, and let's create a new group. So we will call this group mask. Now let's open the mask group and let's select this rectangle and let's click on mask. There you go. Now we will create a small rectangle for the bottom of the app clip. So just press R. Just draw any rectangle, and for width, I will type 402, and for height, 197. There you go. Make sure to align them. Okay, perfect. And let's change its color to white. Let's change the opacity to 50%, and let's add some rounded corner, just for the left and bottom right. So let's type 38. Now let's add some effects. So I will click on the plus sign, and let's add some background blur. Then in effect settings, let's change the blur for 29.67. Okay, perfect. Let's add a new effect. In this case will be a drop shadow. And on effect settings, let's change the y-axis to 22.5, the blur to 44.5, the color to white, FFF, and the opacity to 30%. Now, let's select the design code logo, and let's put it on top of the card. And let's add also some values to the x and y-axis. So for the x-axis, I will type 128, for the y-axis 60.08. Okay, perfect. Now let's create some buttons. So I will add a new frame, and I will give a size of 112 for the width and 52 for the height. I will change the name of the frame to Action Button. Then I will zoom in a little bit, and I will create a rectangle over here. And I will give some corner radius of 30. Then I will change its color to 0091FF. Yeah, this nice blue. Then let's add some effects. So I will click the plus sign, and over there we will add a drop shadow. So for the y-axis, I will type 24.35, for the blur 48.71, and for the color, I will type 5C6799. For opacity, 20%. Okay, perfect. Now let's add another drop shadow. And over here on the y-axis, I will type 1.22, on blur 3.65, and on the color, we will leave it in black and 5%. Okay, nice. Now, we will add a text, so press T, and we will type open. Then make sure that you have the right font, so let's look for SF Pro text. The size 19, and let's choose medium as well. And for the letter spacing, let's type -1. Okay, now let's change the color of the text, and let's choose white. And make sure to center it. Okay, perfect. Now let's add some text. So the title and the description. I will create a new frame. I will give a new size. So for width, I will type 230. For height, 74. and I will just delete the fill. Now let's change the name of the frame, and I will type title and description. Okay. Now I will press T, and I will write Swift UI course. Make sure to select SF Pro Display, bold, and 24. Then I will change its position. So for the x-axis, I will type 0, and for the y-axis, 0 as well. Now I will write the description, so let's press T, and over there, let's write, watch the first 5 videos of this course. Okay, perfect. Now let's change the font to SF Pro Text Regular and 15. Let's choose black as the color, but let's change the opacity to 70%. Okay, nice. Then on the x-axis, let's change it to 0. And I will squeeze this a little bit. Finally, I will create a division line. So I will draw a rectangle. I will press R for that. And for the width, I will type 350. For the height, 1.5. And for the color, I will choose black, but I will give an opacity of 10%. There you go. Now we need to position all the different elements into the app clip. So I will select this X button, and I will change its position. So for X, I will type 357, and for the Y, 21. Then I will place this text, and for the X, I will type 27, and for the Y, 302. Then I will place the bottom, make sure to erase the fill. For the X, I will type 263, and for the Y, 302. Then I will put this line over here, and I will change its position. So for X, I won't change anything, and for Y, 392. Finally, I will place this over here, and also I will change its position. So for X, type 27, and for Y, 407. Okay, cool. Now let's change the name of the frame, and I will type app clip. Great. So this is the end of the video. I really hope you like it. And if you have any comments or questions, please let us know. I will see you in the next one. Bye.
Hello everyone, Surya from Design Plus Code. Today we'll be looking at designing for Apple Watch. Before getting started, I would like you to hop onto Human Interface Guidelines and read about watchOS design. Most importantly, about color, layout, and typography. I say this because it is very important for you to know about the basics, since designing for watchOS is very different from designing for iOS, iPad, and macOS. Since this has a very small screen compared to other Apple devices, it is very important for you not to break the guidelines. And following this is essential as it will make your watch app more usable for the users. At the moment, watchOS has two different fonts, SF Compact and SF Compact Rounded. And these two fonts are specifically designed for Apple Watch, so it is best to stick with this. You can download these fonts by going on to developer.apple.com/fonts. Another thing I want you to look into are the dynamic type sizes, and these are the font sizes that Apple recommends you to follow when designing for watchOS. Now let's get into designing. So I'm going to switch to Figma. By pressing on F, I'm going to open the frame selection, and under watch, I'm going to choose the Apple Watch 44mm frame. And this has a width of 184 and a height of 224. Now let's head over to the fill and set the background color to black. It's also very important to use minimal colors, so always stick to black for the background color so that everything is visible for the users. Since this is a very small screen, you don't want to be creating any distractions using bright and vibrant colors. I will be showing you how to design the notification UI, which will almost cover the basics when it comes to designing for an Apple Watch. I'm going to start by drawing a circle with a width and height of 50 and align it to top left with 8 pixels from the top and 9.5 from the left. Since the minimum margin for Apple Watch 44mm is 9.5 pixels. And this is where our app icon will be. So I'm going over to fill, switch this to image from solid, and apply my icon right here. Now let's add a text that will display the time. Once you have the text, set the fill color to white, the font to SF compact display, and the font size to 17, and align the text to right. Let's move this text to top right with 8 pixels margin from the top and 9.5 from the right. Before moving on, I would like to mention not to go below 13 or 14 points in terms of text. Now let's go ahead and draw a rectangle, set the width to 183, the height to 31, and align it to the center of the frame and set the X value to 0.5. Once you have this, let's align this 31 pixels from the top of the frame. Let's put this below the icon like so. Now go ahead and enable the independent corners and set the corner radius value of top left and top right to 9. Now go over to fill, set the color to white and the fill opacity to 17%. Now let's duplicate this by pressing Command D and select the layer below and set the height to 114. Now go over and disable the independent corners, set the value to 9 for all 4 sides. Let's go over to the fill color and set this to F2, F4, FF and the opacity value to 14%. And this will be containing our notification with the app name. Now for the caption text that will be having our app name, I'm going to duplicate this text, move it right here, and set the font size to 14 and go over to type details and set the letter casing to uppercase. Once done, let's go ahead and put our app name like so. Now for the notification text, I'm going to duplicate this text again, move this below like so and align it to the left side and set the X value to 9.5 and make sure to have a margin top of 10 pixels. Now let's set the text alignment to left. Before moving on, I would like to quickly replace this text by my navigation title. Now let's go ahead and duplicate this and use this our navigation description and make sure to have a gap of 0.5. So I'm going to move this down by 0.5 and set the bounding box width to 165. Before moving on, I'm going to quickly replace with this my navigation description. Now we have completed this, but as you notice, there's not enough hierarchy between these texts. To create this, you can simply select the text and change its weight. So I'm going to set this to semi-bold, and now we have better hierarchy. Now let's go ahead and group all of them together by pressing Command G and place this below the icon. Now let's go ahead and create buttons that will let us view the progress and also dismiss this notification. So I'm going to press R and draw a rectangle, set the width to 183 and the height to 44. Before moving on, I would like to mention that you must strictly have your button sizes set to 44 in terms of height, which is the magic number for touch, and anything below 44 will not be super accurate on tap. Now align it to the center and set the X value to 0.5 and also move this 5 points below the notification. Now go ahead and select this rectangle layer and hold on to Command Option C and copy the layer styles and select the button rectangle and paste this by holding on to Command Option V and set the rounder corner value to 22. Now let's go ahead and add a text that says View Progress and align it to the center of the button using the alignment properties. Now let's go ahead and center align the text and set the fill color to white and group both the text and rectangle together. Now let's duplicate this to create another button and move this 5 points below this button and rename this to Dismiss. Now that we have this, we need to create some sort of contrast between these two buttons. For that, I'm going to select this rectangle and set the color to 209 for FA and up the value of the opacity to 100%. And this is the default accent color for Apple Watch. Of course, you can set your own accent color inside your app. And that's the end of the video. Hope you enjoyed it. See you in the next one. Bye. Hello everyone, Surya from Design Plus Code. In this video, I'll be showing you how to design focused experience using models. So before getting into designing, I would like you to hop onto Human Interface Guidelines and read about modality. Models are very important. It allows people to focus on self-contained tasks, and Apple has provided a great example here, which is writing an email, as this requires a little bit focus from the users so it can make the best out of the model view. Of course, there's many use case for models, but it depends from app to app and also the context. And models come in many types, and let's take a look at them by going onto views. And one of them is Action Sheet, which is used to provide choices for users, as you can see here. Let's also take a look at the activity view, commonly known as a share sheet, and this is really helpful to perform quick tasks such as adding something to the reading list, to the bookmarks, or to your favorites, or to quickly copy them. But the action sheet and the activity view doesn't allow you to take full control of it. You cannot customize it according to your likings, but the model that is customizable is the full screen model view itself. The one common thing I've noticed is many apps use model view to present account information, and it is widely adopted, as you can see. And it's also very important to keep your model narrowly focused. If your model has to deal with account information, keep it that way. Do not bring anything else in. Now let's use this as an inspiration and design our model view. Go to Figma and start designing. Before, I would like you to head on to the community tab and install the iOS UI kit. By installing, you'll have access to all the native elements that iOS uses so that you don't have to recreate them. You also have the models which you can quickly drag and drop into your designs. And for that, what you have to do is switch to the Assets tab and open the Assets catalog. And here you can publish this as a library. Once you have published this, head over to your file and switch to the Assets tab and open the catalog. And here you can enable the iOS UI kit. Once you have enabled this, you can simply search for model. And here you'll have this. All you have to do is simply drag and drop it and you'll have your model. Now let's align this to the top of the frame, and using instances, I'm going to switch this to the iPhone 10. I'm going to edit this a little bit so I can match it to my app style. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to head over to the fill, and using the color picker, I'm going to choose the background color. Once I'm done, I'm going to go to the effects tab and go over to the drop shadow FX settings and drop down the opacity value from 30 to 10%. Now let's change the accent color, so I'm going to unlink the system blue and paste in my accent color. Once done, let's go over and command click these elements, and I'm going to hide the icon and change this left title to cancel and the right title to save. I'm also going to change the title to account. Now we have to create some hierarchy between the left text and the right text. This is because both of them cannot have equal attention from the user. In this case, save is more important. So I'm going to select cancel and set the fill to black and down the opacity value to 42. Like so. And now we have better hierarchy between these two texts. Now that we have the model view ready, let's start setting up the account UI itself. I'm going to start by drawing a circle with a width and height of 44 and align it to the left with 20 pixels margin and the top as well with 20 pixels margin. Once you have this, let's head over to fill and change this to image from solid, and here we can choose our image. So I'm going to quickly set this image. I'm going to press T on my keyboard and add a text. This will be serving as the user's name. Let's align it to 20 pixels on the left and also 20 pixels from the profile picture. Let's set the font weight to medium, the font size to 15, the line height to 140%, and the letter spacing to -0.24. Let's click on this icon to open type details and set the letter casing to uppercase. And go over to fill opacity and drop down to 70%. Now that we have this, let's duplicate this by pressing Command D, move it 20 pixels below, and this will serve as our bio. So I'm going to go to type details and disable the letter casing, and I'm going to change the font to SF Pro Display since our font will be 34 pixels in size, and also the weight to bold, and let's set the fill to 100% opacity. Let's also change the letter spacing to 0.40. Boom, we have our bio text. So I'm going to quickly paste in my bio right here. Let's set the bounding box width to 335. Now, let's select all three elements and press Shift A to add auto layout and set the spacing between items to 20 pixels. I'm going to duplicate this name text by pressing Command D and press the down arrow key to put this below the bio text. Now, let's go over and modify the styling of this. I'm going to set the font size to 13 pixels, the letter spacing to -0.08, and something to mention, if you don't know where to find these tracking values, I highly suggest you to visit Apple's human interface guidelines, and under typography, Apple has a list of tracking values to be used with the appropriate font size. So it's something that I would recommend checking out. Now let's head back to Figma. Let's set the font weight to regular, and once done, let's head on to type details and remove the letter casing. Now I'm going to quickly paste in my text right here. Once done, we have our profile almost done. We are just missing one thing, which are the certificates. So I've already prepared them, so I'm going to quickly paste this and move this to the bottom with 20 pixels margin, and boom, we have our account model view ready. And that's it for this video. Hope you enjoyed it. See you in the next one. Bye. Hello everyone, Surya from Design Plus Code. In this video, I'll be showing you how to create a simple onboarding screen for your app. So before getting started, I would like you to go and read about onboarding in the Human Interface Guidelines by Apple, and this can be a very good place to start with. Another good place to start with is called mobbin.design. Here you can find inspirations for your UI, UX, and most importantly, patterns, as many of the apps follow similar pattern. So you can see that by going over to patterns and filter by patterns, and here you can notice everything is organized into sections. And if I click on onboarding and select either of these, as you can see, many of the apps have similar patterns. So if you take a look at this, it has a title, illustration, description, pagination, and a button. And you can see that here too, an illustration, a title, a description, pagination, and a link or a button. And also you can see a similar pattern followed by this app. And following UI patterns is not bad at all. As users have previous experience with other apps following the same pattern, it will be easy for them to quickly grasp things in your app. Of course, you can come up with your own solution, but oftentimes it ends up confusing users, which might start affecting your app. And you have to be careful about that. Now let's switch to Figma and start designing a simple onboarding screen for our app. So before getting started, I'm going to quickly paste in my status bar and lock it, and also set the frame corner radius to 30 pixels so that we have the iPhone rounded corners. Now, the very first thing that we'll need to add is our app icon. I've already exported it, so I'm going to quickly drag and drop my app icon. Here I have it. Make sure that it is 80 by 80 in size and align it 120 pixels from the top of the screen. And the next thing we'll be needing is our title. So I'm going to press T on my keyboard and add a text and paste in my copy. Now let's align it to the center of the frame and make sure it has a margin top of 20 pixels from the icon itself. Head over to the text properties and let's set the font to SF Pro Display, font weight to bold, and the font size to 36. And set the width of the text bounding box to 280 and align it to the center of the frame. And also let's set the line height to 110%. Now that we have this, let's think about how we want our onboarding screen to be. For me, I want some of the key features of the app to display and a button to continue. And this will be very simple so that users can quickly get through the onboarding and start using the app. Let's start displaying the list of features. So I'm going to press Command D to duplicate this text and move it below, like so, and set the font size to 17 pixels. Now, since our font size is 17, let's change this to SF Pro Text. If a text is below 20 pixels, it should be using SF Pro Text. Let's set the font weight to semi-bold and also the letter spacing to -0.43. Let's also set the align height to 140% and align it to the left. Let's set the bounding box width of the text to 245. And I'm going to quickly change the copy of the text. Great. Now I'm going to press Command D and duplicate the text and move it 8 pixels below. And this text is for a little description for the feature. So I'm going to paste in my description text. So now we need to create contrast between these two texts. For that, I'll be dropping down the weight to regular and also set the fill opacity to 42%. As you can see this, it looks much better. Before moving ahead, let's select both of the text and press Shift plus A to add an auto layout. Let's move this aside, and I want to make this a little bit interesting. To do that, I'll be bringing an icon here. For that, let's go over to SF Symbols and search for an icon that fits the feature that we are talking about. So I'll search for book and I'll choose this one. So Command C and switch back to Figma and paste it. Let's move this to the side. And now let's start styling styling this. I'm going to set the bounding box width to 40 and the height to 40 as well. And make sure that your text alignment is set to center horizontally as well as to vertically. Let's also increase the size to 28, and now let's change the color to the accent color. So I'm going to quickly paste in my accent color. Once done, let's select the icon and the text frame and press Shift A to add an auto layout. Let's set the spacing between items to 20 and make sure that the items are aligned to the middle left. Now let's center this whole frame to the center of the iPhone frame. And boom, you have your feature listing. To have many features, all you want to do is press Command D and move this a little bit to the below, let's say 20 pixels from the first item, and select both of them and press Shift A to add an auto layout. Every time you duplicate this, it will have consistent spacing. Now, the one last thing that we need to add is a button so that users can get into our app and start using it. Now, to create a button, let's copy the feature title and paste it and bring this outside the frame. Let's set the text alignment to center and also change the width from auto height to auto width and align it to the center of the frame. And I'm going to quickly change the text to continue. Once done, let's press Shift A to add an auto layout. Let's change the width of the auto layout frame to 335. So I'm going to quickly enter the value and align it to the center of the frame like so. Let's go to the auto layout options and set the alignment of items to middle center like so. Once done, let's add a fill and set the fill color to accent color. So I'm going to quickly select the icon, copy my accent color and paste it right here. To create contrast, I'm going to change the text color to white. Great. Now, let's head over to the rounded corners and set the value to 16 and open the individual corners option and click on this icon right here and set the corner smoothing value to 60% so that we have the iPhone rounded corners. Let's make sure that the padding around items is set to 16. To make this a little bit interesting, I'm going to switch from a solid color to linear. Once I have this, I'm going to increase the opacity of the second color and go over to the saturation level and set this to 40 and also increase the brightness to 80. And there you go. That's it for this video. Hope you enjoyed it. See you in the next one. Bye. Hello everyone, Surya from Design Plus Code. In this video, I'll be showing you how to design a launch screen for your iOS app in Figma. Before getting started, I would like to talk to you a little bit about launch screen. Launch screens are basically skeleton UI that mimics the first screen of your app to hint users that your content is currently being loaded. And this is better than to display a blank screen, which will put users into confusion if your app takes a while to load. So let's get started with designing our launch screen. I'm going to start by drawing a frame on my canvas by pressing F on my keyboard. Let's select the iPhone 11 Pro. Once you have the frame, press I on your keyboard to access the color picker tool and copy the background color of the home screen. Once you have this, let's set the rounded corners to 30 pixels. Now let's go ahead and create a rectangle by pressing R on the keyboard. And this will be our starting point. I'm now going to inspect the caption text and check its dimension so that I can exactly mimic it on my launch screen. As you can see, the width is 93 and the height is 17. I'm going to do the same. Let's set the width to 93 and height to 17 and make sure that the margins are correct. So 20 pixels from the left and 64 from the top. Awesome. Now I'm going to press Command D on my keyboard to duplicate this frame, which I'll be using for the title. Let's go ahead and inspect the title and check out the dimension. And we'll input the exact same values in the launch screen. So the width to 213 and the height to 41. Awesome. Now let's go ahead and press O on our keyboard to draw an ellipse which will be in the place of the avatar. So let's set the height and width to 32 pixels, align it to the bottom of the title and make sure it is 20 pixels from the right. Now let's go ahead and select both of these rectangles and set the rounded corners to 10. You can also use this little line to define the gap between these items. Now let's go ahead and create a card like we see in the home screen. I'm going to hold Option and Shift, duplicate this rectangle. By holding Shift, I can make sure that my element is aligned. Let's set the margin to 20 pixels. Now let's go ahead and check the dimension of our card, which is 240 by 330 and 30 pixel radius. We'll be using that number for our card in the launch screen. So 240 by 330 and 30 pixel radius. Awesome. Now that we have this, I'm going to again option drag and align my item. So let's set the gap between the cards to 30 and make sure that it is inside the frame. Now that we are done with the first half, let's move to the second half. This will be very quick as we have most of the elements ready for us. All we have to do now is to duplicate the right elements and place them correctly in the screen. I'm going to duplicate the very first rectangle which we used for our caption. I'm going to duplicate this element and we'll be using the same for my section title and the link. We'll duplicate this element again by pressing Command D and use it as the link. I'm going to command click the section title in the home screen. By command clicking, I can directly select the element instead of going through all these layers. Now let's check the dimensions. For the section title, the width is 129 and height is 20. For the link, it is 47 in width and 18 in height. Now we'll resize the elements accordingly. Now let's do the same process for the small cards at the bottom of the screen. Now let's go ahead and select both of these big cards, and by holding on to Option and Shift, I'm going to duplicate it and place it at the bottom of the screen. Now let's go ahead and check the dimensions of the small card, which is 160 by 200. Let's select both of these cards, set the width to 160 and the height to 200 and the spacing between items to 20. It's not important to mimic the tab bar exactly the same. All we are going to do is use the base alone, which has a width of 375 and 83 in the height. So I'm going to exactly do that. Draw a rectangle, set the height to 83 and make sure it is aligned to the bottom. Now, the only thing that is left to do is to apply the right colors. Before moving any further, I would like to say that it is very important to keep your launch screen minimal and subtle. It is not suggested to use any bright colors, and that's why we'll be sticking to monotone colors. I'm going to start by applying the background color for my tab bar. So now that we have this, let's go ahead and click the frame, and using selection colors, I am going to apply the color to all of my shapes. Let's go ahead and select the color of the background, and using the HSB value, I'm going to set the brightness to 90, or let's maybe make it a little bit lighter, 95, and there you go, you have your launch screen ready. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. See you in the next one. Hello everyone, Surya from Design Plus Code. Today we'll look at basic rules and systems to improve app accessibility. Before getting started, head on to the Community tab on Figma and under Plugins, search for Stark and install this plugin, as this will help you to check the contrast between the text and the background color and also help you to improve the accessibility of your app. This also has Colorblind Simulator, which will help you test your app colors under different colorblind situations. Now let's head back to the file, and here you can see my layout, and this looks pretty good, but there are a few accessibility problems that we need to fix. The very first thing I could notice is the buttons. It's very important not to put light colors against light colors. Now let's go ahead and select the containers that hold the play button and the text and set the fill color to black. And as you can see, this looks way better than before. The next thing I can notice are the course information text. Of course, there's better contrast at the bottom since the gradient is light at the bottom, but as you notice in the middle, the background is dark and also the text, so there's a little bit of clash between them. Now let's go ahead and check the contrast between the text and the background. So I'm going to quickly draw a rectangle, and using eye, I'm going to take in the background color. Now that we have this, I'm going to select this and the text and press Command / and search for Stark and hit check contrast. And here you can see there's not enough contrast between the text color and the background color. As you can see, the large text has better contrast than the normal text, but still this is not good enough. So now I'm going to go ahead and select all the text and change this from black to white. And as you can see, now this has much better contrast ratio. Now let's go ahead and check the contrast ratio of this text. Just as expected, this doesn't have enough contrast ratio between the background color. Let's go to the fill and bump up the color opacity to 70%. And now let's check the contrast. And now you can see this checks all 4 values. And this is much better than what we had before. Now that we have fixed all the color issues, let's go ahead and check about the text itself. Let's check if it has good hierarchy and readability. Let's start with the paragraph text that we have over here. Of course, we have a better contrast, but the problem here is the line height of the text is too tight and small, which can often create difficulties when reading. To fix this, let's go over to the text properties and set the line height value to 150%. And now this looks much better. Of course, you don't have to set the value exactly the same, but it is recommended to have the line height value anywhere between 140% to 170%. Moving on, let's check the text hierarchy. And the problem I can notice is at the course information text. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit. As you can see, all the text here has the same color, and this doesn't create enough text hierarchy, which means every text has the same amount of attention. To fix this, I'm going to select the text that needs less attention from the user and drop down the opacity from 100% to 70%. And now this looks better. Another thing I want to do to increase the text hierarchy here is to increase the font size of the course title. So I'm going to go to the text properties and open the styles menu and navigate all the way down to large default and set this to large title bold. And this looks much better. As you can notice, the design looks much better than what we had before. And this is why it is very important to work on accessibility. Before ending this video, I would like to show you about the colorblind simulation, which will help you see how your app looks under different colorblind conditions. Now let's go ahead and select the frame and press Command / and search for Stark. And here select the Stark Vision Simulator. And here you can run the simulation. Now let's go ahead and select a colorblind condition. And here you can notice the color changes and how the colors will be perceived if the user has this condition. Of course, there are many types that you can choose from if you pay for the Pro access, which I will let you decide. And that's the end of the video. Hope you enjoyed it. See you in the next one. Bye! Hello everyone, Surya from Design Plus Code. In this video, I'll be showing you how to create the translucency effect and the sidebar layout for macOS Big Sur. Before getting into design, I would like you to hop onto Human Interface Guidelines and read a little bit about what's new with macOS Big Sur, as this is the latest version of Apple's Mac operating system. This brings many new changes such as using unified icons, which means you'll now be able to use the SF symbols icon for macOS. Before, it was only for iOS and iPadOS. Next up, we have app icons, and as you can notice, this looks similar to what we have in the iOS. As you can notice, this is a little more detailed with the textures and the drop shadows going on. But the idea here is to have consistency with all 3 platforms. Next up, we have app accent colors similar to what we have in iOS. So with Big Sur, you can choose your own color for the app accent, which gives us more control over how the app will look. One last important change is the sidebar. Sidebar now occupies the full height of the window, and it's also more translucent now. Anyway, now let's get into designing. So I'm going to switch to Figma. Let's start by adding our app window. So I'm going to draw a rectangle with a width of 1024 and a height of 760. Make sure that it is aligned to the center of the frame and the border radius is set to 10 pixels. Now let's go ahead and set the fill color to 282828 and the fill opacity to 80%. And by adding the fill opacity, we can create the translucency effect. Now let's head on to the effects and click on the plus icon. Using the drop down, switch to background blur and set the blur value to 30%. Let's add another effect, which is going to be a drop shadow. Set the blur value to 3 and the wow value to 0 and the color opacity to 55%. Now let's go ahead and add one last effect. This time, let's set the blur value to 100, the wow value to 30 and the color opacity to 40%. Great. Now that we have this, I'm going to quickly paste in my controls at the top left with a margin of 20. Now let's go ahead and lock the window layer and start adding our elements for the sidebar. I'm going to start by adding the search bar. So I'm going to press on T and add my text and enter search. Now let's set the fill color to white and the font size to 13 and the font to SF Pro text. Now let's head over to SF symbols and get our search icon. Once you find the icon, press Command C to copy this and switch to Figma, and inside the text layer, paste it like so. Now, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Let's set the font weight to medium and press Shift A to create an auto layout. Now head over to the auto layout option, set the spacing between items to 0. Now go to the alignment and set the top and bottom value to 6 and the left and right value to 8. And let's set the width to 180 pixels. Let's also set the corner radius value to 5 and add a fill color, set this to black and set the color opacity to 25%. Now the one last part left to do is to highlight the text and set the fill opacity to 60%. Awesome. Now that we have the search bar, I'm going to zoom out and align this 18 pixels from the left and 52 pixels from the top. Now let's start adding our sidebar items. I'm going to start with the section title. So let's add a text that says design code and set the font color to white and the font size to 11 and the font weight to semi-bold and drop down the full opacity to 25%. Let's go ahead and align this right here with 20 pixels gap from the search bar and also a margin of 20 pixels from the left. Now let's start adding our navigational items. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Let's start by duplicating this text by pressing Command D and move it below. Let's set the font size to 13, the font weight to medium, and increase the fill opacity to 100%. Now I'm going to quickly replace this text by learn now. We need to have another element here, which is the icon. So I'm going to press Command D to duplicate this and move this text like so. Let's switch to SF symbols and search for rect, and I'm going to choose this icon, copy this, switch back to Figma and paste it right here. Now let's set the bounding box width to 24 and the height to 24 as well, and align the text to horizontal center and also to the vertical centers. Now let's select both of this, and using the alignment properties, I'm going to align to the vertical centers and set the spacing between items to 4 pixels. Now I'm going to press Shift A to create an auto layout and go over to the auto layout options, and in the alignment set this to middle. Let's set the top and bottom alignment values to 2 and the right and left 10 pixels. Now that we have this, I'm going to go ahead and resize the frame width to 180 pixels and set the corner radius value to 5 pixels and add a fill. Set the fill color to our app accent color, which is going to be purple. Now let's move this to the top with 4 pixels gap from the section title. Now I'm going to select both of these layers and press Shift A to add an auto layout. And by selecting the navigational item, I'm going to press Command D 4 times to duplicate this. Now let's go ahead and select all of these 4 newly created navigational items and hide the fill. And by pressing Command, I'm going to select all of these icons. Once selected, I'm going over to the fill. Using the color picker, I'll pick the accent color. Awesome. The only thing that we're missing is to have the right navigational items, so I'm going to quickly do that. Now that we are done, we need to have one more thing, is to have a drop down right here so that users can show and hide the items. What I'm going to do for that is to select this text and set an auto layout. Let's make sure that the spacing between items is set to 0 and also the padding is set to 0. Let's go ahead and select this text, duplicate this, select the frame itself, and go over to the padding and set this to space between from packed and set the width to 180. Great. Now let's switch to SF symbols and search for the drop down icon, which is chevron. Now I'm going to copy the chevron down, switch back to Figma and paste it right here. Great. Now let's zoom out and we have our sidebar. And that's the end of the video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. See you in the next one. Bye.